Welcome to another episode of Over This Should podcast. Thank you for joining me and my absolutely amazing guest. Her name is Allison, a licensed therapist and transformation coach. She is here to talk about all the things from mindset to empowerment to sexuality, you name it. If you want to just take a moment or two to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more, if you'd like to, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So, as you said, my name is Allison. I have a career in therapy. So I think my most prominent identity is being a therapist. But I've expanded out a bit and I've been doing coaching and speaking, appearing on podcasts, things like that. I specialize in anxiety, trauma, and sex and intimacy.
Okay.
And most of the people that I work with, most of the speaking events that I do, are really geared towards women. So I have like a special passion to help, I like to say like help women get out of their own way, like let go of those limiting beliefs that we often have about ourselves. I find there's just like so much shame and guilt inside of like a woman's mindset. So that's a lot of what I do is just really helping people. I don't like to say like find their confidence, but almost like re-find their confidence, right? Because it's there, their empowerment's there. It just sometimes life kind of gets in our way and we disconnect and we just need a little help plugging
Mhm.
back in.
I love that. And that's really relatable. And that's the kind of women that I work with as well. I always talk about the importance of having clarity with who you
Mm,
are and your purpose, confidence, and then the ability to communicate those things out. So we're really aligned on that
mhm.
area. So tell
Beautiful.
me more about you. You niched in. How did you get into your field? How did you decide that women empowerment is a place you want to be?
Yeah, so I think, most healer therapists, coaches' story always kind of is birthed by struggles they face themselves. I'm no different than that. So when I was in high school and college, I really suffered from quite a lot of anxiety and like I'm an 80s, 90s girl. And back then, even just back then, there really wasn't a lot of support. So, I often tell the story the first time I had a really bad panic attack, it actually landed me in the hospital. Like the paramedics had to come. I got rushed to the hospital. I was like 15, 16 years old. And at the end of that, they didn't do anything for me, right? Like there was no like, okay,
Oh
now I'm going to refer
no.
you to a therapist or here's some medication or here's some coping skills. And I went home and like begged my mother not to tell anyone. I was like, please just say I had a stomach ache. Please say I had food poisoning. Like the idea that I was suffering from anxiety was just mortifying to me.
Mhm.
And so kind of through my college career, I studied psychology and human behavior and human sexuality. Um, I just really wanted to get to a point where I normalized, that we face mental health struggles, we face stressors in real life, relationships are hard. And very fortunately, I think the world is, caught up. I'm paralleling sort of what the world is putting out there. I do think there's like a lot more normalization, a lot more conversations about all this stuff. Um, so that's where it started, right? I just wanted to like kind of help people like me
Mhm.
get through working through their thoughts. And my career has pivoted a bit because I used to specialize in simply like what we kind of think of as anxiety, people with panic attacks, generalized anxiety disorder. And now I actually specialize in hyper independent women and what I like to say is like overachievers. And I did not realize, embarrassing truth, I saw this on an Instagram post like 9 years ago. But it was something like giving the difference between regular old fashioned anxiety, I'm having panic attacks, I'm debilitated, and like what we call high functioning anxiety. And it was saying things like overworking, answering your cell phone while you're on vacation, always being the person to stay late at work, always being the person to come in early, the first hand up for the bake sale, the first hand up for being a bridesmaid. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's me. And I started doing a lot of training in it, and I realized that anxiety can show up in many different forms.
Mhm.
And though I had kicked all of those panic attacks, it was just kind of transmuting into sort of perfectionism and overworking and poor boundaries. So, as I've grown as a person, my career has sort of followed suit.
Mhm.
And I do find I tend to, pull in clients that where I can really resonate with their struggles. So now I'm more in that type of a niche.
So that's excellent and so relatable. So I I have a similar story. Definitely overachiever. Didn't realize it when I was in the thick of it, but hopping from one task to the next, saying yes to
Mhm.
everything, not saying no, from working assignments to what you said, to volunteering for everything that had to do with the kids, um, until I burned myself out to nothing and had to really revisit how I was living life. So what I want to do is make sure we give people the tools that they don't get to that burnout. So when you're working with clients, what are some of the things that you do to help them recognize these patterns and then to put some tricks in place to self-soothe or whatever that might look like?
Yeah, and same. I hit a burnout point. So if I can help everybody not hit the burnout point, something that I've been particularly passionate of late is what they call somatic psychology. And all that really means is honoring your mind-body connection, right? And so a huge tool that I use for my clients is really starting to listen to their own intuition and hear and feel like their connection to their thought. And what I mean by that is, someone like, let's use mothers, for example, right? Because this comes up so often. A thought that we often have is like, and it comes from our, culture and all sorts of things, is like, I have to do everything for everyone. If I
Mhm.
wasn't doing everything all of the time, I'd be a terrible mom, right? And if we like drop into our body and like do a little check-in, it's like, how does that feel? And it's like my shoulder might be forward, right? I might be like kind of kicking my leg. Like it's an anxious thought because it's an impossible expectation, right? And now if we shift a thought and it's like, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm allowed to rest, right? Actually, it's really great modeling. If I show my kids I can take time off, I'm allowed to say no, right? Drop into your body. Might be uncomfortable at first because it's unfamiliar, but it actually is like, oh, I'm allowed to rest. I'm doing the best I can, right? It starts to feel different. And so sometimes I think, ultimately the work is really recognizing your thoughts without judgment. Sometimes that gets a little bit difficult to immediately spot.
Mhm.
So, at least I'm just like, all right, let's do a check-in. Like, where are your shoulders? Where is your jaw? How's your head feel? Where is there tension? Like, can we take a deep breath and just like shake it out a little bit and try again? And, it's an unpopular opinion and yet it's mine. Like confidence, empowerment, changing your mindset, like these are all skills, right? So it really is just practicing, and there is a little bit of like make fake it till you make it kind of mentality, right? Like it's going to feel odd, it's not going to feel natural, but we
Right.
can start to shift our thoughts and we can try to move into self-compassion. We don't have to be so hard on ourselves. And, believe it or not, when I say that to people, probably to you and certainly to me at this stage, right? It's like, yeah, of course. But it's shocking to me how, especially again for women, how few women like hear that often, right? They're like, wait, what do you mean I can take a break? Wait, what do you mean it's okay if I put my kid in front of the TV today because I just really wanted to go work out. Or I wanted to take a bath, but I feel terrible because I did that. It's like, what if we just don't feel terrible about it? Right?
I love that. I love that. And I just to put myself in my shoes a long time ago when my kids were little, I felt the same way. Like I couldn't take a break. I couldn't stop. What would people think? Part of being a good mom is doing all of the things. But I want to dig in on something that I feel like it's a little deeper. So we have our mindset work that we have to do, and we could talk through some tips that you and I have done or what we'd recommend. But we also need to create a space where we're not punished for taking a break. So for all the moms who have younger kids,
Yeah.
what I remember vividly is if I wanted to take a bath, chances are someone's knocking at the door, putting their little fingers under the door, trying to get to me, which wasn't relaxing. Or if I needed to go to Target and Starbucks, right? Because that was my out when my kids were little. And I just wanted to do that adventure by myself. And I came
Mhm.
back, and the house looked like a bomb went off. I felt like I was being punished for taking me time. And that was never the intent. It was me reading into it and creating a story around it. Uh,
Mhm.
but moms, how do they, especially of young kids,
Mm.
give themselves permission and then maybe communicate expectations, needs, or boundaries with their partner or baby caretaker
Yeah.
to make sure that they don't come back to something where they're like, well, F this, I don't want to ever do this again.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you use the word like give yourself permission. And again, it sounds like a little bit of a cop out of an answer when I give it like this, but you actually have to practice that, right? So what I know about our brains is the more you say something to yourself, the more that thought becomes automatic. So it isn't enough to just say, like, I'm giving myself permission to go to Target today. It's like that will easily get overridden
Mhm.
by how many times you're probably subconsciously going to tell yourself, yeah, but, right, dot, dot, dot. So if we're starting with ourselves, we really have to make a conscious effort to really shift our mind space, right? So like I am allowed to take the break. I am allowed to take the break. I'm allowed to take the break. I'm going to go to Target, right? And so that's step one. As far as like incorporating, I don't want to feel punished, and therefore I need to actually communicate this need to someone else. Um, standard one-on-one communication is always start with an I sentence rather than a you sentence, right? And communicate a feeling. So, it wouldn't be unheard of if I come back from Target and it's like, dang it, here's my house. It's a disaster. That wasn't even relaxing. Now I'm picking up toys. And I look at my husband, I'm like, I can't even get a break. This isn't even good for me now. Right?
Mhm.
Yes, you're communicating anger, but typically if we're saying it in that way, right, partner is just going to get defensive, right? Like, well, I tried, I did the best I can, blah, 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 right? So we
Mhm.
really want to speak with the feeling. Like, it was really, really difficult for me to take this time to go to Target, right? And I came home and now I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling angry. It's kind of hard. It is harder to like negotiate someone's feelings if they're telling you they're upset. It's way easy to negotiate a behavior, right? Like, well, I did the best I could. I didn't even know the house was a mess already. So, it's kind of like a 1-2 punch, right? Like one, you have to work on yourself and like identifying that need, giving yourself permission. But then, we all are terrible at communication, right? We just are typically terrible. No one gives us skill sets around it, right? But there is more effective ways to communicate. So when I work with clients, I always say, like, we're going to try to learn some ways in which you can more effectively, because it's not just what you have to say,
Mhm.
it's what they have, can they hear it as well?
Right.
Right. And so we got to pull that in as well.
Mhm.
Harder work.
Oh, absolutely. If communication was easier, we would all have wonderful, long-lasting relationships and excel in our careers with no problem. Like that is the hard part. One of the things I have a quote that I just keep written around me now, and it's not in front of me, but it's along the lines of unspoken expectations create premeditated resentment.
Mm,
It
I love
really
it.
resonates with me. And I think about the situations where we need to give ourselves permission to rest, but we need to start framing that in our mind as I deserve, I will
Yeah.
do, I'm appreciated still. And I think just setting up the expectations in advance with the family, if possible, where that's comfortable, helps mitigate some of the resentment, should that be the case when you come home.
Yeah, absolutely. I have of a similar vein. I have a line that I always think like our distress lies between the expectations that we have and what's actually happening, right?
Mm,
And so, how we can kind of play with that a little bit is to, again, express our expectations in a more healthy way, in a more direct way. I have a friend of one, my best friend she works in HR, and she was talking to me one day about having like if you have to speak to an employee, right, and there's going to be some sort of criticism. She was like, people only can hear one thing, right? So you have to be super direct, and our natural reaction is to be like compliment, 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 criticism, compliment, 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 maybe a criticism, and like they're left without like a direct thing.
yes.
So you can be polite and direct, but if you have something to say, it actually is more beneficial to the person receiving it to be direct than try to like flower it in all this way. Still be kind, still be polite. And I've adopted that with sort of how I hope I communicate with my people in my life. And I try the best I can to push this forward for other people. It's like, if you are angry and feeling exhausted that you came home and the house was a mess, try to stick on that. Not like, and then last week you did this, and then this week you did this. And it's because we do, right? We like
Right.
spiral out of control and we're having like 16 conversations at once and the point gets lost. So, yeah, direct communication, kind communication, assertive communication. But yeah, it
Yeah.
helps.
That's awesome. And I would say for those that are the opposite, so I was the opposite. I'm not one to get angry on the outside, and I'm not one to
Mhm.
raise my voice or call names. It's just not my personality. So of course I kept it all on the inside and just harbored ill will and resentment until it was like the Mentos in the Diet Coke bottle that just explodes. That was my
Mhm.
making sure if you are someone who's absolutely able to be articulate with your feelings, that you do so in a way that's productive. And if you're somebody who goes inward, that you find a way to communicate clearly using your I statements, I think is very important at work and at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And when with someone who goes like very inward, something that I like to say to them is like we're communicating one way or the other, right? And
Mm.
so, if we're building resentment, that finds a way out, like you said, a Mentos in a soda bottle, right? And something that I'd like to shift when I a million years ago I did couples counseling. I don't do it anymore. It's very hard. But I would say like, the advantage of speaking to someone, of directly addressing a conflict, the goal is to resolve it, right? So while like conflict avoidance seems really sexy, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to deal with it. That's great. But you are still presenting a problem because eventually it's going to come out one way or the other. But you're void of the opportunity to actually like peacefully, more collectively, in a more partnered way, actually solve it, right? So if we can kind of flip the switch and say like, okay, speaking my needs isn't even just about me. It's actually giving my partner an opportunity to know what I want because we don't know what each other wants, right? I hear that all the time. They're like, he should know, she should know. And it's like, well, they don't. They don't know, right? We have to tell them. We're not mind readers. We're terrible at interpreting other people's thoughts and behaviors, even our partners, probably especially our partners.
I love that. And then to the point of conflict and what you said earlier about keeping it in the moment, when you're the person who avoids and holds it all in, the moment where you do explode, you're like, 19 years ago, you started leaving your beard hair on the bathroom counter. Why can't you clean up after yourself? Recapping an entire multi-generation of offenses that you've collected for the other person. And that's not
Yeah.
helpful. It didn't
No.
help for the last however many years. So
Yeah.
I love the idea of how do you have healthy conflict? Conflict will happen. So what does
If
healthy conflict look like for you in that work relationship or personal relationship? That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I always like to remind people is, a good relationship, work, parents, partners, doesn't really matter who we're talking about. The goal isn't to have be absent of conflict, right? Because that is, again, that's an impossible expectation. So it's just if we can move it towards, there are going to be problems. Like there is inherently going to be problems no matter who you are. But it's the repair that happens afterwards that's actually more important than the problem itself, right?
Mhm.
How do we get through the problem? How do we still hold our values? How do we still talk kindly to ourselves? How do we come together as, a couple, parents, whatever, right? And work together. And like that's the point of support, right? Is like partnership. So it's like, we forget that when we're really angry, right?
Mhm.
Or we're disappointed or we're feeling overwhelmed. But I always try to like pull that to the forefront of my brain, like me and you versus the problem, not me versus you.
I love that. And thinking about the women that you work with that are high performers, and my own story and
Mm.
probably yours, I hold myself to an exceptionally high standard, and sometimes that trickles to what I hold other people to, and that could be really hard because they have different expectations and standards for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
One of the places I had to start reframing was in my own self-talk. I had negative self-talk. I was an 80s, 90s baby too. So, we grew up in the low-rise jeans, your hip bones need to be showing, and the skinny
Yep.
pants. And like I had just stacks and stacks of confidence issues and grew up with that negative self-talk, and it stayed with me. I could not always fake it till you make it from a mindset perspective. I couldn't tell myself, oh, you're beautiful. Oh my gosh, look at your collar. It's so great. I don't know, like whatever. I couldn't tell myself that. I didn't
Yeah.
believe it. I couldn't talk myself into it. One of the turning points for me was when I had kids and I said, would I talk to my son this way? Would I talk to my daughters? Would I look at my daughters and be like, you look so fat today? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, how are you not disgusted with yourself? I would
Yeah.
never say that to my kid, to my sister, to my friends, to my mom,
Mm.
like never. So that's where I started to say, then don't say it to yourself. And while I couldn't be positive, I could be neutral. Hey, body, thank you for getting up today. Thanks for picking up the babies and getting them where they need to go. Thanks for being
Yeah.
able to type that email out in a way that was nice, even though you really wanted to say something else. Thank you very much, fingers, for doing your job. You could just come into a place of gratitude for today versus I love myself, because I couldn't go from the
Yeah.
negativity and self disdain that I had to
Yeah.
a place of positivity.
Absolutely. So, there's a very famous woman who does, she's famous in this like little world. Her name's Dr. Kristen Neff, and she basically is a pioneer for like self-compassion work. And that's her answer, right? When people are like, how do I activate self-compassion? She's like, displace it. Hear yourself saying this to someone you love. What would you do, right? You wouldn't have the tone that you're having. You wouldn't use the words that you're using. So
Mm.
try practicing there. And again, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel like, but they deserve all the goodness, but I don't. But we're just going to start there. And yes, I think neutrality, we call it body neutrality, I think is an important step, right? There's some debate in that field of like whether that's useful or not.
Mm.
And should we just swing the pendulum to like the radical self-love? And I think that that's a great goal if you can do it, but it feels impossible for
Mm.
a lot of people, self included,
Mm.
right? And so if we can just like on the journey from sort of self-deprecation to self-love, if we need a stopping point, we just need to plateau for a minute and just be like, okay, I think right now it's good enough to not say negative things. Even if I can't access the positive things,
Mm.
I consider that a win. I was just speaking to my husband the other day, and he was saying, like, people are glass half full or glass half empty, and like there is no middle. And I'm like, actually, I'm going to debate that a little bit. I think we can just say the glass is at 50%, right? Like we don't have to necessarily interpret it in like a positive or a negative way.
Mm.
And I think if we can move someone from negative thinking to neutral thinking, that is a fantastic step. And I love the examples you use. I use them myself. Like thinking about what your body does rather than what it looks like has
Mm.
been phenomenally helpful for me, right?
Mm.
So I'll look at my legs and I'll say things like, they help me walk my dog every day, right? Like, hey, I have these laugh lines. It's because I laughed in my life,
Mm.
right? I've eaten some delicious food. Um, so yeah, that certainly is what I mean, and I think it's a really easy way to see it when we're talking about our body, but we can do that in all sorts of things too, right? So just like moving towards the mantra of I'm not going to be mean to myself today, right? Good enough, right? I'll just say neutral things. It's fine. That's
I
fine.
love that. I love that. On your website, you talk about hustling with intention. And I want to understand that a little more because I'm seeing people really pivot away from we need to stop hustle culture, we need to stop jumping from one thing to the next. So, what does hustling with intention mean for you?
Yeah, so I birthed that term again out of my own experience when I hit that horrible burnout point. And I had a really high-powered job. I was super successful. And I was just sitting in a meeting one day, and my terrible boss was saying terrible things. And I just had this like unbelievable burnout moment where I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I am working so hard all of the time. I
Mhm.
am giving up relationships. I'm giving up time with my family. I'm giving up travel, and I'm doing this for someone else's dream. Like I'm doing this because I feel like I have to, not because I actually want to.
Mhm.
And I like went home, I called an emergency meeting with my therapist. I was like, I hate my job, I hate my life. And I loved certain things about my life. I loved my partner, I loved my friends, but I wasn't doing anything that actually nurtured the things that I cared about. I had no time for like forget self-care, like I didn't have a hobby. And I came out of that experience. I quit. It was very uncomfortable time for a long time. I like to think that part of why I share that part of the story is that it was hard is because it isn't always as just like, and then you quit the job and you jumped into something else, right? It's like I quit my very high powered job, became a happy hour bartender. It like struggled to pay my rent for a while, but I trusted myself to get through it. And I really started to work really hard at listening to my own intuition. Like, what did I want? Like, a, miracle question, like, what does my life look like? And at that point, I had really moved away from clinical work. I loved being a therapist. I loved mental health. I loved all the stuff I was doing. I pivoted so far away from that. And so my journey was coming back, right? And when I took back up my career, right, I went for a second master's. I had to go back to school. I was like, I had to start all over again. I rebuilt my career, and now I'm probably working just as hard as I used to, but it feels different to me, right? Because I actually care about what I'm doing, because it's something that like does, even though it's, it's work, right? So of course it's going to be difficult sometimes, but like if I pull back, I'm actually really connected to the energy in which I'm putting in. I get something back out of it. And I think for me, like that's what the hustle with intention is. It's like I work with high achieving people, highly successful people. I'm not going to tell them to just like read books every day and sit by the beach. Like these are not those people. They are going to want to work hard, but at least we can work hard in the things that really make us feel good. And like that's the point, right? Like that's your purpose. Your purpose isn't working for the sake of working. It's working for alignment of what you actually want to put into the world. So
Mhm.
that's what I mean by like try to hustle out of passion rather than pressure.
Yeah, I love that. So many of us get swept up in, sure, I'll take that assignment. Sure, I'll try that new thing. And don't get me wrong, saying yes to different opportunities at work, I think helped set me apart in my career, and that's a great thing. But when you keep saying yes to things that don't necessarily align with what brings you joy, or you feel like is your purpose or passion, and you get further and further down that path, I think that's where you have this, what the heck am I doing with my life? I'm miserable at my job. None of this makes sense anymore. Is it worth
Yeah.
the money? And then you are fortunate enough to have trusted yourself. Some people just stay in that grind because they don't know any better. But I love
Yeah.
the notion of, if you have to step back, even when you're in that job that you don't like because you have bills to pay, if you have to step back and think through what does bring me fulfillment?
Hmm.
What am I doing when I'm doing something that I enjoy the most? Those are really important questions. How do you help people pull that out and pull it up to the surface?
Yeah, I during COVID, I was talking to like one of my coaches or my therapists, and I was saying, I didn't know what to do with myself, right? Like, so I had three jobs at the time, and like many other people, I lost two out of my three jobs. So I was doing my one job, but I had more time than I had had in my life, and I was like, I have no idea, no idea what to do. And her advice to me was like, think back to before life started like taking things away from you, right? What did you love to do as a kid? Like, let's just start there. And again, manifestation and like changing your life doesn't look as quickly as like, I've had a thought, I'm going to do it. But we can use these little thoughts to get creative on how we can access some of that. And the answer that I came up with was dancing and swimming, right? And so I put what I'd like to call a pool in my backyard. I'm going to put the word pool in a quotation mark because it's basically a giant bathtub that still sits in my backyard today. It's a disgusting eyesore, but I actually can like put myself into water, right? And it's like, again, it's not even about the hobby, right? It's about remembering something about myself that's like uniquely me. And I think even just doing that, like reestablishing some hobbies,
Mhm.
things that I didn't need other people for, things that were just like super important to me, it started to build that confidence where I was like, oh, if I can reconnect to my hobbies, maybe I can think about life in a different way. Maybe I can voice myself differently. Like it has this domino effect of confidence. Um, so so yeah, I think when we're like rebuilding our intuition and all of those things, like just listening to that voice and getting creative. It doesn't mean this I have to say very passionately, if you get to the point where you're like, I'm not happy, I feel like I'm on the brink of a burnout, but I also have bills to pay, I have kids to support, those are all real and valid things.
Yes.
You can access fulfillment and it doesn't have to be abandoning everything that you are doing, right? That is what mine looked like. I got to such a point where I like couldn't handle life that way. It doesn't have to look like that.
Mhm.
It's just starting to pull in some courage and some self-trust and some open-mindedness. I would say my big three are like flexibility, creativity, and patience, right? We can start to figure out how are we going to shift things, because sometimes it maybe doesn't look like quitting your job, for instance. It looks just like asking for a raise or asking for more time off, or talking to your boss about different boundaries, right? Like there's ways to play. It's just remembering that you deserve these things. Your life deserves fulfillment,
Mhm.
period. Right?
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. Creating space for PTO, letting your boss know what your boundaries are, um,
Hmm.
realizing that you can have hobbies that you don't have to monetize. They can simply bring you joy. I think that's
Absolutely.
really important too.
Hmm.
I started doing last year, last July. I was like, I enjoy-ish yoga. I'd like to get more into this mind-body connection piece of it and the somatic healing like you spoke about earlier. And so I took a yoga teacher training class and I graduated in December. And
You.
it's really cool to turn your hobby into something where you feel more confident. And then
Hmm.
that confidence gives you confidence. Not always. I was in a yoga class the other day and this yoga teacher was doing the most profound things I've ever seen. And I was like, there's my body will not do that.
Yeah.
There's no chance. What is the modification? And that's okay too. But it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah, just taking the things that bring you a little bit of joy, comfort, peace,
Yeah.
and allowing yourself the space and time to do that is really important.
Yeah, and you make a good point, right? Like I do sometimes we think we equate competence with competence with confidence, and they do interplay with each other for sure. But you can start some things that you're not even good at. That dancing, epiphany that I had. I love to dance. The last time I had danced was when I was, of quite a different body and quite a different flexibility and status and quite a different age. And so when I went back to dancing, I actually took up pole dancing and was shocked to see how inflexible and hard it was, right? And I became extremely self-conscious that I couldn't do it well. And I really had to work like my mindset of this is for, I'm doing this for the sake of it, right? Like this isn't performative. I don't have to show anyone. This is really private for me. I was in an all women's studio. They're beautifully supportive, right? But kind of detaching, confidence doesn't have to mean I'm good at something, right? Like you can just take up space and be awkward and be a beginner. Like everyone starts somewhere, right? So I have gotten better over the year. I'm actually currently pregnant, so I just gave it up this week. Thank you. But I'll be returning when I'm back and I'll probably be awkward again. But yes, but finding those things that just make you smile, right? It does have this profound effect on other things in your life for sure.
I totally agree with that. And that's so funny. So I self-proclaim have 2 left feet, but I love dancing too. So every morning, my morning routine is I'll dance. That's my morning exercise. And I can be as awkward as I want because I just like have a subscription online. So I'll do it on my TV. I'm just my own awkward self. I have a great time. I go from, I don't know if I really want to work out this morning. I'd rather stay in bed to just smiling and laughing and being goofy. And it's a great time. But what's really funny, I am not of the body mind age, but I'm not of that where I would in my early 20s by any means. We've had a work event and they blocked an entire space for us. It was just work people there. They had a karaoke person come and they had a DJ and it was so much fun. And everybody was up dancing. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get in this mix. This will be fun. And they played a Black Eyed Peas song. I think it was Fergalicious. And all of a sudden, I'm out there with my 2 left feet having the best time because I was comfortable enough in my body because I've already given myself permission to dance like an awkward fool every single morning. I was comfortable to be awkward, not in some big look at me kind of way, because being a leader in a company, you do have some standards you have to hold yourself to, but enough to just be goofy and be okay with that, which makes you vulnerable with other people. And I think more approachable. You don't always have to be perfect. You don't always have to have it right. And I think a lot of us type A personalities forget that.
Yes.
Because we think we have to keep showing up flawlessly. And no one's flawless. Like,
oh my gosh, no, they aren't. We aren't. No.
Oh, Beyonce. She might be flawless.
Beyonce, yeah, she's pretty flawless.
Wrong about that.
You
You also talk about on your website ditching doubt and gaining self-confidence. How can a person who is in that sort of doubt spiral gain the confidence they need to feel good?
Yeah, it echoes a lot of what we've talked about already, right? But it like has to start with mindset work. And noticing where your doubts are. So when I work with clients, we often do what's called a thought inventory, right? And it's like, I want you to just kind of like pull back into your brain and think of like, what are some doubts that just show up for you, right? Like what do you say to yourself? Right. And we'll go slow and they might not come. Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I say I don't belong at that table. I have to earn my worth. Right. And sometimes it takes a little longer. But once we've kind of outlined where those thoughts come from, what I like to do next is say, okay, where did you first hear these? Right? Because we learn things as we grow up, right? We're very easily influenced. And a lot of the time we'll see that the thoughts that have been marinating inside of our brains actually didn't originate with us, right? So I just had a client this week, very cliche example, but it was like no pain, no gain. You have to work hard. If you're not working hard, you're lazy,
Mm.
right? And it's like, okay, where did you get that from? And she was able to think like my softball coach, like she played softball her whole life. She actually went up to the minor leagues, right? And she's like, yeah, from the time I was like 5, 6, 6, like this is what I've learned. And then we can kind of pull back and be like, okay, do you agree with that? Is this something that today, this version of you, do you believe that? No, I mean, I don't really believe that. I think I can get way softer on that. I don't think you have to like be pained to be gained, right? Like there's ways to find success that are more gentle and compassionate and forgiving. And it's like, okay, we realize this thought is outside of yourself. This doubt is outside of yourself. It's not fundamentally something intrinsic. It's just a thought, right? And we can start to shift the thought then, right? We've now acknowledged it. We've rejected it. It's going to keep showing up, right? I wish we could have one conversation and like, that's the work. It does not work that way, right? We're going to have this conversation. That thought's going to keep coming back. And sometimes you're going to notice it, and sometimes it's just going to be working in the background. But the times that you do notice it, I want you to stop, like literally stop what you're doing. And we're going to have a preconceived like mantra to like a coping thought, right? Like, I'm doing the best I can, right? Like that's like an easy go-to on for most people. And the active shift, like, you know, again, I get really nerdy on brain science, but like there is, you'll trust me, I won't bother to explain it to you today, but there is an actual literal brain shift that happens when we start to redirect our thoughts, right? We build new neural pathways. So we're like letting that old thought die and we're birthing this new version of ourselves. And that takes time, but I just had a client this week. She allowed me to tell this story and I wrote it in a newsletter. But she wrote me an email and was like, I'm no longer faking it. Like, you've been telling me to fake it before, you know, fake it until I make it for a while. And I've been practicing, like, I am good enough. I am good enough. I am allowed to say no. Boundaries are self-care. And she's like, 7 months later, I had a conversation with my partner and I asserted a boundary and it didn't feel like I was failing myself or them, right? Like it's working. And it's like it does work, right? It's just sort of the trust the process part gets a little cringy, but that's the only way to do it, you know? So
Yes,
noticing the thoughts, rejecting the thoughts, and having something you can say to yourself to move the thought out.
I love that. Obviously, I agree with you on all the neuroscience and neuroplasticity of the brain. I think it's amazing what we can do. For me, when I was going through this journey, again, I'm not somebody who can swing that pendulum all the way. I don't. So I always start from a place of gratitude. And when I have a negative thought pop up, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't serve me anymore. And then whatever that predetermined mantra would be. So it's like, thank you. This no longer serves me. Instead, I am capable of doing hard things or whatever
Yes.
that might be, right? So I try to be like, I understand that inner me, that young Pamela that sits in there somewhere, she had all these thoughts and beliefs poured into her from people, from the environment, from culture, you name it. So thank you. It helped me become who I am, but it no longer serves me. This is the new thing. And that way I don't feel like I'm at war with myself as much and it makes it more tolerable.
Beautiful. I have a similar personal approach. I can do tough things as one of mine, and my anxiety lies, right? So I will often say like, thank you for giving me this information. Like you're warning me that there's a fear here, right? But I'm okay. I don't, you know, thank you, right? And I also try to put in like, is this thought helpful,
Yeah.
right? And on rare occasion it is like, okay, yeah, sure. Most of the time it's not. And it's like, okay, so how can I morph this, transmute this into a more helpful thought, right? I can do tough things for me has been just like a super helpful one.
Mhm.
But yeah, again, it's like finding your personal, what resonates with you. We can come up with hundreds, thousands probably of coping skills, but we're unique humans. So what we've learned, how our brain works, what works for us is going to be deeply personal. So, you know, I always think like bring in all this information, listen to podcasts, talk to people, learn the coping skills, and then really hold on to the ones that work for you and you can ditch the rest.
Yeah. And allow yourself to change and make new skills as you are developing. I know for me, I try to come from a place of, to your point with Dr. Neff, self-compassion. So thank you. This no longer serves me. But sometimes I feel feisty. I'm in my feisty era. So the thought will come up and I just be like, Ariana Grande, thank you next. Like I got this. And that's okay too. You need to let yourself in whatever moment you're having accept,
Yeah.
let it flow through. Don't try to shove it down. Don't try to make it some huge change. Don't make it a big, for me, I don't make it a big thing. I just move it along. You're here,
Absolutely.
move it along.
Yeah, I mean all of that. And also giving ourselves the grace that this stuff takes time.
Mm.
I was having like a huge reflective moment the other day where I went on my baby moon to Bermuda. By the way, Bermuda is amazing. I didn't know. It's so beautiful. And I was in a bathing suit, like fully, like I'm a very pale person. I usually used to get like self-tanned, right? I was like making sure my hair was all done and I just didn't have time for any of that. And I went on my baby moon and I was on the beach, pasty white, like in my bathing suit. And I had an awareness that I like didn't feel self-conscious and I'm pregnant, right? Like, so it's like, your body looks different.
Yeah.
And I was having such appreciation for all of the work that I've done because like did not happen overnight. I would say from the point that I was like in an active eating disorder, really like self-loathing, having like dangerous, destructive patterns to like present day where I'm like untanned, like no makeup on, hair blowing everywhere in a bathing suit
Oh,
on the beach, like that took 12 years, right? Like that did not just start with, I had some good thoughts and then here we are. But there is a payoff. And I like to kind of displace it in a way where it's like, we see this with exercise, right? My husband's a marathon runner, right? Time for him to be the kind of guy that can run at, what is it, 26 miles, right? So we have to appreciate that these things take time, but that if you keep showing up for yourself, there will be progress. You will see transformation.
mhm.
It's just, again, back to that self-trust and trusting the process, right? Like it's sort of like leaping before you look. Like I just have to trust that this is worth it, even if I can't see immediate results, because most of the time we're not going to see immediate change.
You are spot on. And I would love to have you back to dive into the eating disorder side of things. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks that have disordered eating, full-blown anorexia, bulimia, you name it, it's out there. I'd like to be able to dive into that with you in the future.
Yeah.
As you've brought so many great ideas to the surface here. As we're bringing this episode to a close, I love to ask people, what's your favorite quote? Because I'm a quote collector. So do you
Oh.
have a favorite quote that you could share with us?
I do. So it's Maya Angelou, one of my favorite humans, but it's when we know better, we do better.
Yes. Oh, that's a good one. And I love her. She's a wisdom bomb,
Yes.
that one.
Wisdom bomb.
Love it. So where can the audience find you? How can they engage with you, Allison?
Yeah, I have a podcast myself on a lot of what we covered. Actually, I'd love to have you on if you are ever open. I can solicit you another time. But it's called Becoming Unstoppable, and it's on all the places you find your podcasts.
Mhm.
And then I live on the internet as we do these days, and my website is anotefromyourtherapist.com, and most of my social media handles are by the same name, A Note from Your Therapist.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get all of that linked into the show notes for everybody who
Beautiful.
wants to connect with you. You are wonderful. Thank you for really focusing on women and moving us from a place of saying yes to everything and having no boundaries to being comfortable in our skin and feeling empowered. That's amazing. The world needs more of it, and I'm so grateful for you.
Same, right back to you.